The tempest raged outside like a wounded beast, lashing against the windows and tearing through the forest with relentless fury. Inside the modest cabin, Mason knelt beside Emma's bed, gently brushing her damp auburn curls from her forehead. His 7-year-old daughter had finally drifted to sleep, her small chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm, blissfully unaware of nature's wrath beyond their walls. The harsh buzz of his phone cut through the quiet. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hello. His voice was low and weary. I'm so sorry to call this late. A woman's voice trembled on the line. But I'm in trouble. My cabin's roof is starting to collapse from the storm. Water's pouring in everywhere. I think the whole thing might come down any minute. Before we continue with today's story, if you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber helps me keep sharing these inspiring tales that touch your day. Thank you for your support. Mason rubbed his eyes, glancing at Emma's peaceful form. Where are you exactly? She gave him directions to a remote cabin near the lake, nearly 20 minutes from town. I really can't leave right now, he said, regret lacing his words. My daughter's asleep, and I'm alone with her. She's only 7. Plus, this storm is brutal. I don't do emergency repairs in weather like this. A pause hung between them. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I've tried everyone else. I'm terrified and completely alone. In the background, Mason could hear the unmistakable sounds of rushing water and the ominous creak of straining wood. I'm sorry, he repeated firmly. I hope someone closer can help you. He ended the call and stood motionless in Emma's room, staring at the silent phone. The guilt began almost immediately, gnawing at him. He'd made the responsible choice, hadn't he? Emma needed him here. Driving out in this weather was dangerous. He didn't even know this woman, but her voice echoed in his mind. I'm terrified. I'm completely alone. Mason paced through the kitchen, watching sheets of rain slice across his yard through the window. Lightning illuminated the flooded street. He tried to push away the image forming in his mind. A frightened woman watching her ceiling bow under the storm's assault, with no one coming to help. Damn it, he muttered. Within minutes, he had gathered his tools, raincoat, and boots. He slipped back into Emma's room, kissed her forehead, and whispered that he loved her. Then he carefully bundled her into his arms and carried her through the downpour to his neighbor's house. Mrs. Rivera answered the door in her nightgown, concern etched across her face. Mason, is everything all right? Someone needs emergency help with their roof. Can you watch Emma for a while? It's important. Without hesitation, the retired teacher reached for the sleeping child. Of course, go. Don't worry about her. He sprinted back to his truck, instantly soaked despite his raincoat. The engine roared to life, and he pulled onto the flooded road, windshield wipers working furiously against the deluge. The town lights faded behind him as he pushed deeper into the surrounding wilderness. The narrow mountain road twisted dangerously, water cascading across its surface in rivulets. His headlights carved a meager path through the darkness, finally revealing a muddy driveway nearly hidden by overgrown pines. The cabin materialized from the darkness, a weathered structure perched precariously on the hillside. A faint light flickered from an upstairs window, the only sign of life in the storm-ravaged wilderness. As Mason killed the engine and stepped into the torrential rain, he thought again of the fear in her voice. He didn't know who waited inside, but he knew with absolute certainty that he couldn't leave anyone to face this night alone. The cabin stood isolated on the western edge of the lake, surrounded by ancient pines that groaned under the storm's assault. There were no nearby neighbors, no streetlights, nothing but wilderness stretching for miles in every direction. Only the relentless drumming of rain against the roof and the howling wind broke the profound isolation. Inside, a single battery-powered lantern cast eerie shadows across the small living area, where puddles had already formed on the pine floor. Sophia stood at the bottom of the stairs, completely drenched despite the heavy canvas jacket draped over her shoulders. Her hands trembled as she clutched a blue tarp and duct tape, a desperate, futile attempt at saving her sanctuary. She had exhausted every option, called a handful of neighbors whose numbers she'd collected since moving here, emergency services, who couldn't reach her until morning, and finally, after finding an old business card tucked in a drawer, a local handyman. When Mason had answered only to refuse, something inside her had crumbled. The realization that she was truly alone struck deeper than her fear of the collapsing roof. With a steadying breath, Sophia climbed the attic stairs, where a jagged hole in the roof exposed the cabin to nature's full fury. Wind howled through the opening, sending loose shingles clattering across the floor. Rain poured in, soaking the insulation and creating a treacherous surface beneath her feet. Desperation overriding caution, Sophia carefully stepped out onto the edge of the roof. She'd taken risks before, but nothing this reckless. Still, what choice did she have? She moved cautiously, crouching low against the wind, struggling to spread the tarp across the damaged section. Just as she reached to secure the first corner with tape, a powerful gust caught her off balance. Her foot slipped on the slick surface. A sharp cry escaped her as her leg twisted violently, striking against a jutting metal flashing near the chimney. Pain exploded up her calf as she lost her grip completely. She felt herself falling, tumbling down the steep pitch of the roof, unable to find purchase. Then suddenly, impact, not with the ground, but with something solid yet yielding. Strong arms wrapped around her, absorbing the force of her fall. The momentum carried them both over the edge, and they crashed together into the sodden earth below. They rolled apart, both gasping for breath. Mason recovered first, wiping rain from his eyes as he sat up. "What were you thinking?" he demanded, his voice sharp with adrenaline and concern. Sophia winced, clutching her injured leg. "I had no other option." "No other option?" he echoed incredulously. "You climbed onto a roof during a storm like this. Nobody else would help me." She shot back, her voice breaking. "What was I supposed to do?" Mason opened his mouth to argue further, then stopped. He really looked at her for the first time, her dark hair plastered to her pale face, her slender frame shivering violently as she hugged herself. In her eyes wasn't recklessness or stupidity, just exhaustion and the raw vulnerability of someone pushed to their limit. He rose slowly and extended his hand. "Come on, let's get you inside." She hesitated briefly before accepting his offer. When she tried to stand, her injured leg buckled beneath her. Mason caught her weight, supporting her as she leaned against him. Once inside, he eased her onto the couch and quickly located a towel in the bathroom. He knelt beside her, gently draping it around her shoulders, then examined her injured leg. "Your ankle's swelling fast," he observed, carefully probing the area. "I hit that metal flashing by the chimney," she murmured, grimacing. "Felt like my whole leg shattered." "Well, it didn't," he said, his tone softening. "You're lucky." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "Lucky isn't a word I've associated with myself lately." Mason's jaw tightened. "I should have come earlier. That's on me." Sophia looked up, surprised by his admission. "I didn't realize how bad your situation was," he continued. "I've got Emma, my daughter, to consider, but I should have come sooner." She nodded slightly. "I understand. You have someone who depends on you." "Me?" Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. "No one would notice if this place washed away in the storm." Mason leaned back, studying her. "That's not true anymore." The tempest continued its assault on the cabin, but the tarp now partially blocked the hole in the roof. He knew he needed to properly secure it, but for the moment, they sat in companionable silence, two strangers brought together by nature's violence. Eventually, Sophia whispered, "Thank you for catching me." A half-smile softened his features. "You're welcome. Try not to make a habit." Despite everything, the pain radiating from her leg, the storm raging outside, the lingering sting of being initially rejected, she laughed softly. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the world didn't seem to be completely collapsing around her. The storm continued its relentless assault on the cabin, but within its walls, something gentler had begun to take hold. Mason knelt before the old stone fireplace, coaxing reluctant flames from damp kindling. After several attempts, a small fire flickered to life, casting a warm amber glow throughout the room and pushing back the chill that had settled into their bones. Sophia sat curled in an oversized armchair, wrapped in a thick quilt, her injured leg propped on a cushion. Her hair had begun to dry, dark waves framing her face. She cradled a steaming mug of tea that Mason had prepared, more hot water than tea, but the gesture itself had steadied her trembling hands. Mason glanced over as he stoked the growing flames. "You really are lucky," he said, his voice softer now, thoughtful. "That fall could have been so much worse." "I don't feel particularly lucky," Sophia murmured, "but I'm grateful you showed up." He didn't respond immediately, just nodded and settled into the chair across from her. His posture remained tense, like someone unaccustomed to stillness. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, just uncharted. Emma, Sophia said softly. That's your daughter's name, right? Mason's expression immediately warmed. Yeah, 7 years old. Smartest kid I've ever known. Definitely got her mother's brains rather than mine. She's fortunate to have you. A shadow crossed his face, that half smile again, never quite reaching his eyes. I try. Her mother, she died during childbirth. Sophia's expression instantly softened, genuine compassion replacing any trace of self-pity. I'm so sorry. It was unexpected. Complications during delivery. She was perfectly healthy right up until that night. He paused, swallowing hard. We were living in Portland then. I had a good career as a structural engineer, working on commercial projects, even a few skyscrapers. After she died, everything fell apart. I couldn't manage alone with a newborn. He stared into the fire, his voice growing quieter. So I walked away from all of it. Moved back here where I grew up. Took whatever work came my way. Plumbing, roofing, car repairs. Anything that let me stay close to home for Emma. Sophia watched him, her fingers tightening around the warm mug. That's a profound change. I didn't have a choice, he said simply. I couldn't bear the thought of strangers raising her. I wanted to be the face she saw when she opened her eyes each morning. His jaw flexed as he continued to watch the flames. I used to have ambitions. Now I have just one hope each night, that she sleeps safely until morning. That she's happy. That I've done at least one thing right by her that day. Sophia remained silent, observing this weathered man who had rescued her from the rooftop and now sat before her, resilient yet vulnerable. Something about his directness, his unpolished honesty, touched her more deeply than she'd expected. I never knew my father that way, she said quietly. Mason looked up. My father was influential, successful. Everyone in the country knew his name. But when I was little, I used to wonder if he even knew mine. She traced the rim of her mug. He named me Sophia after his favorite philosopher. But he never really saw me as a person, just another element of his legacy. That's a difficult way to grow up, Mason said, his voice gentler now. I ran from all of it eventually. The wealth, the pressure, the people who only saw me as a connection to something they wanted. She gestured vaguely around the modest cabin. I bought this place under a different name. No assistants, no security detail, just quiet. I wanted to feel real for once, even if it meant sitting in a leaking cabin during the worst storm of the year. Mason leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. You don't match any rich person I've ever met. I hope not, she replied sincerely. And you're the first person tonight who's looked at me without immediately asking what I do, or who I am, or what connections I might have. He chuckled dryly. You didn't exactly give me the chance. Sophia smiled sheepishly. Fair point. Mason studied her a moment longer. Sophia, he repeated thoughtfully. Well, I guess we're both not exactly where we plan to be in life. No, she agreed, her voice softening. But perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. The storm outside began to ease slightly, the furious hammering of rain transitioning to a steadier rhythm. Mason stood and stretched, glancing toward the attic. I need to properly secure that tarp. It'll hold through the night, but I wouldn't trust it beyond that. Sophia nodded, pulling the quilt tighter. Please be careful. He hesitated before leaving the room, then looked back at her. You're not as alone as you think, are you? Her eyes followed him as he walked away. The fire crackled behind her, its small but persistent warmth filling the space between them. She leaned back in the chair, her ankles still throbbing, but her heart unexpectedly lighter. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone had appeared for her not because of her name, but despite it. Outside, the storm gradually retreated. Inside, bathed in firelight, Sophia sat quietly, no longer shivering. She watched the dancing flames, and somewhere deep within, a fragile hope took root. Perhaps, just maybe, she had finally been truly seen. The rain had ceased 3 days ago, but the air still carried the rich scent of damp earth and pine. Sophia's cabin, though still showing signs of wear, already felt more alive than it had in years. A new warmth permeated its rooms, partly from the repaired roof and the firewood Mason had helped her stack, but mostly from the people who now moved within its walls. Late morning sunlight filtered through the trees as Mason's truck rumbled up the gravel drive, Emma bouncing excitedly in the passenger seat. Sophia had called the previous evening, asking if he could examine the troublesome heating system and the loose railing on her porch. She had tried to sound casual, but both recognized the hopeful undercurrent in her voice. As Mason parked, Emma practically leapt from the truck, racing toward the porch where Sophia already waited with a welcoming smile and a plate of freshly baked blueberry scones. "Hi, Miss Sophia," Emma called, taking the steps two at a time. "Well, hello there, sunshine," Sophia greeted, kneeling to offer Emma a scone. "They're still warm from the oven." Emma's eyes widened with delight. "You're like a forest fairy, a fairy who bakes magic treats." Mason laughed as he closed the truck door. "She's been talking about those scones since our last visit." Sophia's laughter joined his, light and genuine. "Then I suppose I'll need to ensure there's always a fresh batch waiting when you arrive." The morning passed swiftly. Mason worked on the heating system while Emma helped Sophia in the kitchen. Sophia's laughter echoed through the cabin more than once, and each time, Mason paused momentarily in his work, listening to its melody. Later, he found them at the old upright piano tucked in the corner of the living room. Sophia played with graceful confidence, her fingers dancing across the keys as if they were extensions of herself. Emma sat beside her, entranced by the music flowing around them. "What song is that?" Mason asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Something my grandmother taught me," Sophia replied, her eyes still following her hands across the keys. "I haven't played it in years, but I thought Emma might enjoy it." "I love it," Emma declared enthusiastically. "She makes the piano tell stories, Dad." Mason watched them, a rare tenderness softening his typically guarded expression. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen Emma so relaxed, so fully present in a moment of simple joy. That evening, Sophia invited them to stay for dinner. The meal was uncomplicated: roasted chicken, garden vegetables, fresh bread, but sharing around her table transformed it into something more meaningful, more familial. Emma sat between them, happily chattering about school, her favorite books, and an elaborate dream where she and Sophia had ridden on the back of a giant eagle through a forest of candy trees. Sophia laughed until tears glistened in her eyes, and Mason found himself smiling more freely than he had in months. "You have a way with her," he said quietly as they stood side by side washing dishes afterward. Sophia shrugged, her voice softening. "She makes it easy. She has a beautiful spirit." Mason nodded. "She gets that from her mother." Sophia hesitated before asking, "If you ever lost her too, would you still be yourself?" He turned sharply, the plate in his hand slipping slightly. "What? I just mean, sometimes we tie so much of our identity to the people we love. I wonder who we'd be without them." Mason's expression darkened instantly. "That's a hell of a thing to say." "I didn't. She's not just someone I love," he interrupted, his voice tight with sudden emotion. "She's the reason I breathe, the reason I wake up every day." "You think I just bandaged the grief and moved on?" "I didn't. I became someone entirely different because I had to. And Emma, she's the only reason I'm still standing at all." Sophia's face fell. "Mason, I'm sorry. I never meant to suggest." "Don't," he cut her off, roughly drying his hands. "Don't make it sound like she's a crutch or a burden. She's not. She's everything to me." He turned toward the living room, calling, "Emma, get your coat." The little girl looked up from the puzzle she was working on, confusion clouding her eyes. "But we're not finished playing. We're leaving," Mason said firmly, pulling on his jacket. Sophia stood frozen, guilt and regret tangling in her throat. "Mason, please wait." But he didn't respond. He opened the door, letting the cool evening air rush in, and gently guided Emma outside. The door closed behind them with a finality that echoed through the suddenly silent cabin. Sophia remained motionless in her kitchen, hands still damp, the dishes forgotten. The warmth that had filled the space earlier evaporated, leaving a hollowness she hadn't anticipated. She'd intended to ask a deeper philosophical question about identity and loss. Instead, she'd unknowingly touched a wound still too raw to bear. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees, rustling leaves across the porch. Inside, Sophia sat down in the quiet, staring at the puzzle Emma had left unfinished, one small piece resting by itself on the table. The morning air was a bit colder than it had been in weeks. Heavy clouds hung low over the mountains, mirroring the weight Mason carried in his chest. He hadn't planned on returning. After the tense dinner and harsh words exchanged, he had convinced himself it was over, whatever it had been. But as he worked in his small shop behind his house, He remembered his toolbox, still sitting in Sophia's utility room. He pulled into her driveway, uncertain whether to knock or simply retrieve his belongings and disappear. The cabin looked quiet, almost abandoned. He stepped onto the porch and tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the cabin was warm but empty. The fireplace had gone cold. He moved toward the back room, scanning for his tools, but his attention caught on something in the dining area. A folder left open on the table. Curiosity drew him closer. A photograph lay on top. Sophia is seated at the head of an elegant conference table, surrounded by men and women in expensive suits. Beneath the image, a caption read, Sophia Kinsella, CEO of Kinsella Global Investments. Next to the photo were property maps, legal documents, and development plans. Mason recognized one of the locations immediately. His company had just purchased the lakefront properties west of town, the ones locals had fought to keep undeveloped for years. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with brutal clarity. She wasn't just a woman seeking solitude. She was the Sophia Kinsella, heir to one of the largest private investment firms in the country. The sound of footsteps broke his trance. Sophia froze in the doorway when she saw him. "I forgot my tools," he said, his voice cold as the morning air. She stepped forward cautiously. "I was going to tell you." When he shot back, "After I fixed your roof? After my daughter started to care about you? After you bought up half the town?" "Mason, it's not what you think." "Then what is it? Some kind of experiment? Come play at being ordinary and see how the working class lives?" "I'm just a single dad with a struggling business. An easy mark, right?" "No," she said quickly, her eyes filling. "I was trying to find out if someone could care about me without the name, without the money, without the power hanging over everything. You lied to me. I was escaping," she said, her voice cracking. "That life, those people, they never truly saw me." He stared at her, hurt etched deep in his weathered face. "Well, I saw you, and I let you in. I let my daughter love you. And now I don't even know who you are." He grabbed his toolbox and turned toward the door. "Mason, please," she whispered. "I never meant to hurt anyone." He paused, looked back once. "You didn't just lie to me. You took something that felt genuine and turned it into a game." Then he was gone. Sophia stood motionless, the echo of the slamming door lingering in the silence. The cabin around her felt painfully empty. She moved to the couch and sank down, her hands trembling. The documents still lay exposed, broadcasting the truth she had tried so desperately to hide. Her gaze drifted to the coffee table where one of Emma's puzzle pieces remained. She picked it up, running her thumb over its uneven edges. For all the corporate acquisitions she had overseen, for all the buildings that bore her family's name, this moment felt like her most profound failure. The storm she had truly feared had finally arrived, and it had nothing to do with the weather. The wind picked up again that afternoon, whipping through the forest with renewed determination. Another storm approached. The sky darkened as Mason stood on his porch, watching the clouds gather, his chest tight with everything he had been trying not to feel: anger, betrayal, and the constant pressure of financial insecurity. Inside, Emma sat curled on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, staring blankly at the dark television screen. She hadn't smiled or spoken much since they'd left Sophia's cabin. Mason knelt beside her. "You okay, sweetheart?" She didn't answer immediately, then asked in a small voice, "Are we ever going to see her again?" Mason sighed and brushed her hair back from her face. "I don't know, Em. But she didn't do anything wrong," Emma whispered. "You were mean to her." "I know," he said quietly. "It's complicated. You always say that when you don't want to explain something to me." He gave a tired smile. "Why don't you go color for a bit? I'll start dinner soon." He retreated to the kitchen, half listening to the weather alert on the radio. Wind gusts are expected to exceed 65 miles per hour. Potential power outages across the county. He checked the pantry. Canned beans, pasta, nothing fresh. Grocery shopping would have to wait until after the storm. 15 minutes later, he returned to the living room. Emma was gone. He called out, checking each room, bathroom, bedroom, closet. Nothing. Then he noticed the back door standing ajar. Her yellow raincoat was missing from its hook. Panic surged through him like an electrical current. "Emma!" He ran outside, shouting her name into the rising wind. Neighbors emerged from their homes as he raced down the street. "Have you seen Emma? 7 years old, dark hair, pink rain boots. She's missing." No one had spotted her. Within minutes, people organized into search parties, flashlights in hand. Calls went out. Groups formed and dispersed into the neighborhood. Mason ran through parks, schoolyards, and the edge of the forest preserve. Each passing second felt like an eternity. The rain began to fall in cold, heavy sheets. The wind howled with increasing fury. His mind raced with terrifying possibilities. What if she tried to cross the creek? What if she were alone, cold, frightened? Or worse? His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered immediately. Mason? It's Sophia. Her voice was clear, focused. I just heard Emma's missing. I think I know where she might be. He froze mid-stride. Where? She once told me the old boathouse by the lake looked like a fairy castle from her storybook. I'm heading there now. I'll meet you. Mason sprinted back to his truck and tore out of the driveway. The road was slick with rain, and fallen branches created obstacles at every turn. Visibility had deteriorated to almost nothing. 10 minutes of white-knuckle driving felt like hours. The abandoned boathouse finally appeared through the curtain of rain, a dilapidated structure looming against the angry sky. Mason slammed on the brakes, leapt from the truck, and raced to the weathered doors, shoving until they creaked open. Inside, wind whistled through broken windows. Dust covered the old rowing shells and equipment. Then he heard it. A soft sob carried on the wind. He turned toward the sound. Sophia sat on the floor in a corner, cradling Emma protectively beneath her coat. The child clung to her, soaked but safe. Mason dropped to his knees. Emma. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. Daddy. He pulled her into his arms, crushed her against his chest, and buried his face in her wet hair. I've got you. I've got you. You're safe now. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I just wanted to find Sophia. I didn't mean to scare you. You're okay? He whispered, voice breaking with emotion. That's all that matters. He looked over Emma's head at Sophia. Her clothes were drenched, her face pale with worry, but she had kept his daughter safe through the storm. You found her, he said, the words carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I was wrong, he admitted, the words difficult but necessary. About you. About everything. They gazed at each other in the dim light of the abandoned boathouse, the storm raging just beyond its walls. You're not who I thought you were, he whispered. You're more. And there, amid the forgotten boats and weathered oars, something shifted between them quietly, profoundly. A fragment of broken trust beginning to heal. The morning after the storm broke clear and golden, as if the sky itself were offering a fresh beginning. Streets glistened with puddles reflecting crisp blue overhead. The air smelled clean, purified by the night's tempest. In the calm that followed chaos, something new had begun to stir between Mason and Sophia. Something fragile, yet full of possibility. Later that afternoon, Mason called her. You hungry? He asked, his voice cautious but hopeful. Emma keeps asking when her forest fairy is coming to dinner. Sophia smiled, the warmth audible in her response. I could eat. When she arrived at Mason's home, a modest cottage with weathered siding and a slightly crooked mailbox, delicious aromas wafted through the open windows. Inside, the space was undeniably lived in. The furniture showed signs of wear, but also of care. Walls displayed framed crayon drawings and family photographs. A small fire crackled in the stone hearth. Emma raced to greet her with an exuberant hug. I made name cards for the table, she announced proudly, holding up construction paper decorated with glitter and markers. Dinner was uncomplicated: herb-roasted chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, steamed vegetables, and bread that Mason had somehow managed not to burn. They sat close together, laughter filling spaces where silence had once reigned. Afterward, they gathered in the living room, where a jigsaw puzzle waited on the coffee table. They arranged themselves on the floor, piecing together an image of mountains reflected in a still lake. Emma giggled whenever Mason deliberately placed pieces in obviously wrong positions, and Sophia played along, helping him pretend the mistakes were intentional. For a while, there was no past, no fortune, no guilt, just the simple joy of shared space, of being seen and accepted for who they truly were. Sophia felt it most profoundly when Emma gradually leaned against her, eyelids growing heavy, her small head nestled against Sophia's side as if it belonged there. When Emma finally drifted to sleep on the couch, Mason tucked a blanket around her and rejoined Sophia, who stood quietly by the fireplace, arms wrapped around herself. You're home, she said softly. It's nothing like mine, but somehow it feels more authentic than any place I've ever lived. He leaned against the wall, watching the flames dance. It's small. The roof leaks when the wind blows from the north. The heating is unreliable, but it's ours. She studied his face in the firelight. Mason, I want to do something meaningful. Something larger than myself. He raised an eyebrow, curious. I've been considering it for months, she continued. I want to establish a foundation. Build homes for people who truly need them. Single parents, foster children aging out of the system, and veterans returning with nowhere to go. Not just structures, but genuine homes. Safe places. Warm places. His expression softened. Where? I want to start here, she said. In this community. And I want you to be part of it. He exhaled slowly. Sophia, that's... She reached into her bag and withdrew a folder, offering it to him. It's a preliminary proposal. The funding is already allocated. All I need is someone to lead the design team. Someone who truly understands what home means. Mason opened it, carefully examining the contents. The mission statement, architectural notes, and project timelines with his name already penciled into the leadership role. His hands trembled slightly. He began, then paused. I used to dream about this back when I was building luxury condominiums for people who barely glanced at the blueprints. I thought someday I'd create something that actually mattered. Then life intervened. Sophia, step closer. Perhaps life has finally brought you back to it. He looked up at her, something awakening in his chest that he hadn't dared acknowledge for years. Why me? Because you never stopped building, she said simply. Even when it was just you and Emma against the world, you kept creating. You built love, security, a life worth living. More than most ever achieve. His voice roughened with emotion. You're offering me a second chance. I'm offering us both one. He closed the folder, holding it against his heart. All right, he said, voice thick with feeling. Let's build something real together. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of possibility settling between them. Then Sophia stepped forward deliberately, her intentions clear at her eyes. Mason met her gaze, and then, without hesitation, he kissed her. It wasn't desperate or rushed. It was steady grounding. Her hands found their way to his chest, his to her waist, as the room around them seemed to fade away into perfect stillness. The only sound was Emma's soft breathing from the couch. When they finally separated, neither spoke immediately, but they didn't need to. In that kiss, something had been communicated more clearly than anything they'd said before. We aren't broken beyond repair. We're beginning again, together. The sky stretched endlessly blue, painted with delicate brushstrokes of gold and rose as the sun climbed higher. Where once there had been vacant land, now stood rows of beautiful new homes with bright trim and flower-lined porches. Colorful flags fluttered in the gentle spring breeze. Children laughed on freshly built playgrounds, and banners reading Hearth and Home Foundation danced against the cloudless sky. Mason adjusted his tie beneath the white pavilion at the center of the development. 1 year ago, he had arrived at Sophia's door carrying only his toolbox and a heart burdened with loss. Today, he stood as the lead architect and project manager of a housing initiative that had provided homes to dozens of families, with more communities planned across the region. His eyes scanned the gathering crowd until he found Emma. She wore a pale yellow sundress, her dark hair braided with tiny white daisies. She looked radiant, at peace, full of life. A year ago, that light had dimmed in her eyes. Now it shone brighter than ever. And then Sophia, elegant and composed, was speaking with community leaders near the ribbon-cutting area. She wore a flowing cream dress,